Sound check one, sound check one. Heritage Committee, February 24th, sound check one. Sound check two, Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee meeting.
Welcome, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee to order. Please be advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Presentations and reports considered at this meeting are available on the city's website, and members of the public can contact the clerk's office to acquire documents in an alternative format. As we go through our roll call, I just ask that all of the members acknowledge their presence. Councillor Kretsch?
I'm here.
Janice Brown?
Present.
Karen Burke?
Present.
Graham Carroll?
Present.
Charles Dimitri has sent his regrets today. Lynn Lundstedt?
Present.
Robin McKee?
Here.
Timothy Ritchie?
Virtually present.
And Will Rosart. Right. As we move on, Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, we have a few changes to our today's agenda. Under item 8, staff presentations, the presentation was distributed yesterday in the addendum, so you'll see it there. Under consent, we have an additional delegated approval, HP 2023-009. Under 9.3, we have the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee minutes. We also have a request to change the order of items to have item 13.2, which is an update to follow approval of the agenda, and an additional 13.3, which will be an update on the recruitment for new members to the committee. I believe Janice has a question.
Through the chair, not a question, but I would request that number 5, communications 5.1, Devin Thompson, respecting Philpott Memorial Action Church, 84 York Boulevard, Hamilton, be moved to after the staff presentation because of the implications with regard to Bill 23. Thank you.
I've made note of that change, Madam Chair.
And just to clarify, item 13.2 would be brought to after approval of the minutes from the previous meeting, not the agenda.
That is correct. Thank you.
If there are no other changes, may I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I see Graham and I see Karen.
And is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Under declarations of interest, are there any declarations today? Seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of our minutes from the previous meeting. We have before us the meeting minutes from January 26, 2023. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I see Janice and a seconder, please. I see Tim. Thank you.
Okay. And is there anyone opposed to that approval? Seeing none, that item is carried. We're now going to move on to item 13.2 as amended in our agenda, and this is going to be an overview and update of our Heritage Recognition Awards. So first off, I'd like to wish everyone a very happy Heritage Week. This is Heritage Week, and we thought it was the best way to celebrate Heritage Week in Hamilton would be to announce our Heritage Recognition Awards. Our Heritage Recognition Awards from the Municipal Heritage Committee were established in 2007. So for all of these years, we've been looking at the good news items that have been happening in Hamilton and the good things, the achievements that people have been doing to make sure that our heritage in the community is preserved and protected. The award nominations that were brought forward came from a number of different routes, but it came from nominations that were made by the committee members themselves and our working groups, but also from a public nomination process. So our education working group took those nominations and have done an extensive review. They've been gathering information and photographs, and today it's my privilege to be able to present the award recipients that we will be announcing today, followed by, this will be a brief announcement of the awards, but we'll be following with more depth descriptions as we update the municipal website, and then we'll also be having an in-person celebration that we look forward to inviting all of the award recipients and their guests to join and have an in-person celebration where we can present their awards in the spring. So as we begin, we have our presentation today. And as we go into our summary of recipients, you can see that we have a number of award categories. So we have 11 award categories this year, culminating in 26 awards. Our first award category is our Heritage Property Conservation Awards, and these are presented to property owners demonstrating an outstanding contribution to the conservation, restoration, and preservation of Hamilton's built heritage. So this year we have 4 properties that are residential and 1 commercial. So we have 2 Ravenscliffe Avenue, that 1906, a registered property that was built for George W. Robinson. 44 Chatham Street in Hamilton, an 1899 property that was built by George Chapman, local contractor. And that heritage property is inventoried. Our next 2 properties are 22 Homewood Avenue, an 1891 property, as well as 79 South Street West in Dundas, 1944. Lovingly cared for by all of their property owners. And finally, in this category, we have 263 John Street South, which is the current offices of Amy Katz and Associates, an inventoried property that's a very prominent corner, and they've done a number of upgrades to make sure that the property has maintained its historic details. The next category is the Heritage Property Developer Award. And this is presented to a heritage property developer that has demonstrated excellence in heritage. The award winner for this is Indwell for the Oaks and the Royal Oaks Dairy and Dairy Lofts. Not only did they maintain the original dairy building, but they were able to incorporate a development offering residential affordable housing for the community. Under adaptive reuse of heritage property awards, this is given to property owners that have taken a property through a change of use. They've been able to extend the life of a heritage property. We recognize 200 Caroline Street, Bridgeworks, 280 Main Street East, which was the former Thomas Anglican. Bridgeworks, once a foundry and Hamilton Bridgeworks company, built in 1872, is now a vibrant community hub leased by Sonic Onion as a performance area and a multi-use events facility. The former Thomas Anglican Church has now been converted very lovingly into apartment conversion, providing affordable housing for the community. Our next 2 properties is 366 Victoria Avenue, which is the Factory Media Resource Center. This was formerly the Cataract Building. This was a property that was used as a demonstration property to let the city know that their buildings could be benefiting from hydroelectric, and it's now a vibrant facility for the Factory Media Resource Center and Gallery. And finally, 29 Harriet Street. The owner is Ion Studio Group. They've taken the Felt and Brush Company, and through their renovations and adaptive reuse, they're creating a vibrant media center, multi-use center, and a place for Center 3's textile studios, amongst other establishments that are going to be benefiting from not just this building, but a number of other buildings that Ion Group has amassed as a bigger development in the Barton Tiffany area. Our Cultural Heritage Landscape Award recognizes contributions for cultural heritage landscape, looking beyond the built fabric of a building and looking at the heritage of our landscapes that we have in Hamilton. And this year we wanted to recognize the RBG, the Royal Botanical Gardens, for the Indigenous Plant Medicine Trail, located at 16 Old Gulf Road. Taking the trail users on a discovery of what the Indigenous plant life was in that time, and learning more about the Indigenous life of this community and its history. Making heritage accessible. This is an award that we established because too often we see heritage buildings that how can their life or their use be extended if they're not barrier-free or not providing accessibility? So this was to provide recognition of facilities that are looking to make their facilities more accessible. This year, we recognize the Hamilton Public Library for the Dundas branch, 18 Ogilvie Street. The Dundas branch has a long history in Dundas. This particular location was built in 1972, more of a contemporary architecture and design, but very fitting within the community and to extend its usefulness, creating those access points that are barrier-free, providing ramps and accessibility. Education and Heritage Award. As we developed this category, we found that there was a number of individuals in the community that were doing things beyond owning a property. These were people that were volunteering, they were providing a sense of education, teaching a next generation of the community about our heritage. So we'd like to recognize 3 award recipients in this category. Mark McNeil and Kevin Werner are both journalists we know well. Mark McNeil is a journalist, and you'll see his features in the Hamilton Spectator. Often he's highlighting very interesting stories, things that are happening in the community. Kevin Werner, working for the Community News, has often covered the heritage goings-on of our community and looking to express what's going on with not just things in the community, but the buildings, the planning strategies, and what's going on for Hamilton's heritage. And finally, in this category is Sarah Sheehan and the Barton Street BIA for the Woodlands Park Ghost Landscape Placemaking Project. This was a very interesting project where they took a particular site and looked at how this site was affected over its history and showing photographs of what was and what's no, and then you can experience what's no longer there. So really did bring an engagement to the community. So these are our 3 education and heritage awards. The Art of Heritage Award. Again, as we looked at how heritage is interacting with the community, we found that more and more as our community diversifies and what it's offering, not just industry, but art was becoming more and more prominent in the community, that we had individuals that were really reflecting our heritage in the artwork that they were producing. So this category, we're recognizing 2 local artists, Sarah Sandham for Hammond Doodles and Gordon Leverton. Both taking an interesting perspective, taking our historic fabric, our heritage buildings, and reinterpreting those into a really interesting sense of art. Under our Heritage Group, Society and Specialty Team Award, we wanted to recognize that there are groups that have come together because of a challenge that's been in the community. They may be coming together for a special project. This year, we wanted to recognize the Friends of St. Giles. We all know the property very well. We know the challenges that it's facing. This award is to recognize the group of neighbors from the Ward 3 community that live around there, also the heritage advocates that feel very passionate about this building and do not want to see it lost to demolition or demolition by neglect. So we wanted to recognize their efforts in championing this building and speaking for it. Again, another category that has sort of evolved in our award process is the Heritage Streetscape Revitalization Award. We found as development planning is changing, as people are being more sympathetic to maintaining heritage property and incorporating it into a development, that it was becoming important to recognize how planning and development is affecting the streetscape and the sense of improving our streetscapes. This year's award recipient, we have Green Venture for depaving Paradise projects. So projects along Barton Street as well as on Cannon Street, helping to improve the Barton area as well as the Beasley neighborhood, bringing communities together to depave and make a greener, more sustainable community and enhancing the heritage properties along that street. The Lock Street Improvement Project, undertaken by the City of Hamilton, but really helping to pull forward and Lock Street, give it a better future with a sense of landscaping, streetscaping, and really integrating that boulevard with the shops and stores and the heritage buildings along that way. And finally, 154 James Street North. This property owner taking a very prominent corner. We have before and after shots of this particular one. They really took this project as a public engagement process, asking the neighborhood what pink colors were more suitable, that were desirable for that corner. They hired craftsmen that took detail of cornice work that was missing and replicated it with the existing to make sure it matched and blended in and restructured that facade so that it really became a prominent place on that streetscape. And down to our last two categories. This year is a new category. We wanted to establish a specialized heritage craft and trade category. Again, as these awards evolved, we saw the talent that is in this city, whether it's art, whether it's heritage property development, but there's also the specialized tradespeople that are actually helping to promote and maintain and conserve our heritage. So we wanted to recognize excellence in heritage trade, recognizing the use of construction techniques and materials that are compatible to the building's original architectural qualities, demonstrating a high level of craftsmanship. So our inaugural award winners. We want to recognize Alan Stacey, who is the principal conservator of Heritage Mill Historic Building Conservation. We are all aware of the work of Alan. He has done a number of properties throughout the city and all various works of doing woodwork, doors, windows, but really conserving those features of a building and using his long expertise to make sure that things are done properly, that the proper materials are used, the proper finishes are used, and the building techniques. Jason Schubert for Schubert Traditional Craftwork for the woodwork specifically at 33 Ontario Street. And Jason helped to conserve and preserve the detailing, the woodwork detailing, the doors of this particular property meticulously to help that property owner maintain their building. And we recognize DR Masonry and Authentic Ironworks for the Laidlaw United Church front stair restoration project. There was an unfortunate accident with a street racing incident along this street. And unfortunately, the church took the brunt of that accident. So they were able to hire DR Masonry and Authentic Ironworks to restore that front entrance to back to what it was, if not. And finally, we don't, not every year we have the opportunity to recognize some volunteers that are standouts in helping our Municipal Heritage Committee. This year we have 2 volunteers that we'd like to recognize. First, we'd like to recognize Jim Charlton, a volunteer and a member of our Municipal Heritage Committee Inventory and Research Working Group. Jim will be receiving this award posthumously. He recently passed away, but his efforts needed to be recognized for all of the work that he did to contribute to what we do as a Municipal Heritage Committee and the Working Group and our inventory projects. We'd also like to recognize Vivian Chang, a student artist. Vivian came to us through our connection with Bernie Custis and the art teacher from Bernie Custis Secondary School. And Vivian helped us to prepare our coloring book that we use for our public outreach. So we started with this very first sketch that Vivian did, and that went on to her doing a total of 7 pieces of artwork for our Municipal Heritage Committee that we could then incorporate into coloring books and again used for public outreach and engagement with children and adults alike. So we want to recognize both of those individuals with awards this year. So as we just conclude the awards presentation, I want to congratulate all of the award recipients. We have a very good group of awards this year that we are looking forward to having an in-person celebration. And I also want to thank all of the volunteers, all of the working group members that have helped to work through that package and do the research and review, and for staff's assistance and help with all of this as we've gone through. So.
If I may have a mover and seconder to receive the presentation and the update. I see Lynn and I see Janice.
Well done, Alyssa. Beautiful presentation.
Thank you, Janice. So is there anyone opposed to receiving? Okay. Karen, did you have a question?
I just had a comment. I found that presentation so inspiring thank you to everybody who is protecting these buildings. They look absolutely great, and all the volunteer work, and it's amazing. So this is the kind of thing, right, that it keeps you wanting to be involved in heritage. And so thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Karen. Any other comments? No? All right. Okay. So we move on to our next item on the agenda.
Which will be the staff presentation.
So item 8.1 is the response to Bill 23, Schedule 6, More Homes Built Faster Act 2022, and its changes to the Ontario Heritage Act and its regulations, PED 222211A, citywide. So we have Alyssa Golden here to give a presentation on that report. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you, Chair and members. So yes, on your agenda today, item 8.1 is the staff report. I'm going to attempt to give you a high-level overview. I know there's a lot of content. We've been dealing with a lot of legislative changes. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have after the presentation. And I also have some backup slides as well if there's any specific questions about some of the categories regarding future designation work as well. And just as a reminder, this is a follow-up report. So staff did report to this committee in November of last year to just introduce the legislative changes that were coming forward to the Ontario Heritage Act as a result of Bill 23, More Homes Built Faster Act. So I'll start with just a summary of what the changes are, go into the implications of those changes, the actions recommended to address them, the staff recommendations specifically in the report, and then a little bit on next steps moving forward. So there are a number of changes proposed, that have taken place now. I'm going to highlight the key ones, but for the full list, please refer to page 7 of the staff report. The main thing really is the changes now introducing limitations on how we use the Municipal Heritage Register as a tool for heritage conservation. Where in the past, we could list properties indefinitely on the register that might have some heritage value or interest and be able to require 60 days notice before they're demolished. There is now a 2-year expiry on listing properties on the register. So that's any new listings as well as ones that are already listed on it at the time of Bill 23 being proclaimed. And this would essentially make the register as a placeholder for designation only, would not provide that longer term flagging option to be able to at least have interim protection from demolition. And in addition to these 2-year expiries, we now have 5-year restrictions on being able to relist a property to the register after it has been expired and removed from it. The other key change is in regards to restrictions on being able to designate as a part of Planning Act applications. So as you may recall, previous legislative changes had introduced this new limitation to be able to designate a property subject to what's referred to as a prescribed event under the Planning Act. So this includes zoning bylaw amendments, official plan amendments, draft plans of subdivision. And there was a requirement that if we were to designate a property as municipality, it would have to be done so within 90 days of that prescribed event being triggered. And the additional legislative changes now introduce a requirement for a property to also be listed on the register at the time of that prescribed event in order to also designate within 90 days of it being triggered. And then the final major change resulting from Bill 23 are new thresholds for determining cultural heritage value or interest. So as this committee knows well, we use Ontario Regulation 906, which is the provincial criteria for determining heritage value and whether a property is worthy of designation under the Heritage Act. Previously, we were required to demonstrate that a property meets at least one of the criteria in 906. We now are required to demonstrate that a property meets 2 of the criteria in Ontario Regulation 906. I will note, however, though, most of the properties that we currently have designated, and when we conduct a review of properties that we believe to be significant and worthy of designation, typically do meet multiple criteria. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a single property that only meets 1 criteria that we currently have designated, but it is something to keep in mind moving forward. And as well, there's a new introduction for requirement for properties to meet at least one criteria in order to be listed on the register as a non-designated property. Again, from our current city process, we do already screen properties using 906 to ensure that they have potential heritage value or interest before we list them on the register. So this is we're already in conformity with this process, essentially. So I just wanted to highlight visually this idea of we do inventory work to identify properties as being of potential heritage value or interest, and we have a variety of tools available to us as a municipality to try to conserve those properties. Previously, registration or listing on the register was a separate tool that provided that interim protection, and really the shift now is registration is really a placeholder before we potentially designate a property under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, and also related to those prescribed events I mentioned regarding to Planning Act applications. So in terms of the implications of these changes, so currently we have just over 2,300 properties listed on our Municipal Heritage Register, the majority of these listings resulting from our proactive Built Heritage Inventory strategy work. And with the new provisions of the Ontario Heritage Act, these will automatically be removed from the register 2 years from the time the act was proclaimed. So that would be January 1st, 2025. They would all be removed. This also has implications in terms of our existing designation process. So currently we have a multi-year work plan. A lot of the properties currently on our designation work plan were flagged proactively again as a part of our Built Heritage Inventory work. And right now that work plan spans into about 2039. And part of the rationale for our work plan and being able to do that work in the future is that we had at least interim protection by having those properties listed on the register until we could do a more comprehensive review for designation. So this would result essentially in that multi-year work plan process no longer being viable because we wouldn't have that interim protection option while we wait to do more comprehensive review. And it is important to note, even though this makes our current work plan no longer viable, we had already been experiencing some issues in terms of the sustainability of that work plan, the fact that we've now spanned into about 166 candidates for designation on it, and some of the challenges we were facing in terms of trying to work through that work plan in a timely manner. Other implications in terms of these changes. So again, as I mentioned, we now have these restrictions in terms of prescribed events and being able to designate. So there's going to be a need to proactively list properties on the register before we get to prescribed events if they haven't already been listed in order for us as a municipality to be able to actually designate them within that 90-day window of the prescribed event being triggered. And there are some potential gaps in that. As I mentioned, we have 2,300 or so properties currently on the register. Those will be removed. And then once they're removed, we won't be able to relist them for 5 years. So there is the potential for gaps in coverage where we have properties that we cannot technically add back to the register and would not be able to list in advance of prescribed events potentially happening. And really this results in a need for a new strategic approach to how we list properties on the register, as well as how we conduct our proactive Built Heritage Inventory work in the future. So what's being proposed are 2 key actions to address these changes. The first is developing a new heritage designation process. This would involve essentially taking our existing work plan, not throwing it out, throwing out the window, but transferring that into 2 new categories of how we approach designations moving forward. That includes a category of high priority candidates to be designated, as well as a longer term list that would flag candidates for designation and be able to prompt staff to do work if something's proposed to do for those properties. And the other key action is refocusing our proactive heritage inventory work. And I'll just walk through these 2 actions in a little bit more detail. So the first is to end or rescind our existing council-adopted designation process. As I mentioned, it currently takes us into 2039. That's no longer viable or sustainable. In the act of ending this current process, this would also end the use of our additional city-specific designation criteria. These have been helpful criteria for the purposes of comprehensively reviewing properties, but they aren't legislatively required, although they are consistent with the Ontario Regulation 906. So that would be proposed to be eliminated as well. And due to some of the tight timelines and challenges that we'll be facing around addressing our existing candidates for designation as well as potential new designations triggered by prescribed events, we want to ensure that we can get those recommendations forward through this committee for their advice before they get to council. So we would also be eliminating an additional review of draft heritage assessments at the Inventory and Research Working Group, which is currently our practice. The next action related to a new heritage designation process is implementing a new list of candidates for Part 4 designation under the Heritage Act. So we would be rolling all of our existing designation work plan priorities onto this list, and that list is attached as Appendix A to this report. This list is proposed to be publicly available on our website, as well staff would be updating Heritage Committee on the list on a regular basis. And really, this list would act as a trigger for staff to initiate or review properties for designation if certain things take place. That could be an owner actually wanting their property to be designated and requesting that that proceed in a timely manner. If demolition of a property is proposed, or potentially a very significant alteration that would be eliminating the potential heritage attributes that would be designated as a part of protection of the property. If a prescribed event is triggered, as I've mentioned before, and looking forward into the future, if we have staff resources permitting and we've gotten through this second category that I'm about to mention as well. And for reference, some additional detail on this can be found on pages 7 and 8 of the report. And I'll just note also in terms of this list and how staff categorized and the recommendations of what be added to it versus the high priority list I'm about to go into, the properties on this list are generally stable residential properties that wouldn't necessarily be a part of Planning Act applications. So there's a certain, I guess, lower risk by having them on this this particular list as opposed to pursuing designation in the immediate short term. So this takes us to the second category that we would be shifting our existing designation candidates onto. And this is a list of 60 properties that staff have flagged as high priorities for Part 4 designation. And the goal would be to pursue review and hopefully bring forward recommendations to designate these properties before January 1st, 2025, when they would be removed from the register. This list is attached as Appendix B to the staff report. And the main criteria looked at in terms of identifying what a high priority would be are properties that have some perceived or immediate risk of potential demolition, removal, or some form of substantial alteration. And this also, this category focuses on properties that were originally requested by an owner or a third party versus the majority of the other properties on our work plan, which were proactively identified as a part of our built heritage inventory work. And I have included a couple notes because there's a lot of properties and there's some nuances to some of them. So I will just note there are some properties not on this high priority list that were technically requested by a third party or heritage committee, but are generally stable residential properties. So those are not proposed to be high priorities for us to look at in the next 2 years, and instead added to that public list for future reference. And there's also a handful of properties that have been flagged as significant built resources and potential candidates as a part of built heritage inventory work, mostly the community-led initiatives, but had not been officially added to the work plan at the time. So those are only being recommended to be added to that candidate list and not pursued for designation within the next 2 years. And then finally, wrapping up this new designation process action, how do we address new designation requests outside of the existing work plan that we're looking to transition over? So this would be similar to our existing process. So a request to designate could be submitted by the property owner themselves, a third party, Heritage Committee could request staff to look into it, or there could be a direction of council as well. So that's similar to what our current process is. And in terms of how staff would address those requests, we would review the property against the provincial criteria, Ontario Regulation 906. We would, similar to our current process, notify the property owner and the local councillor of the request having been received. But the difference here is that we would report directly to Heritage Committee if it is a property that does meet the criteria and is a potential candidate to be designated. We would move immediately to reporting to Heritage Committee with advice on a recommended action for that property under the Heritage Act. And this new process would really allow us to streamline designations, especially if they're being requested directly by a property owner. The second category of action that I mentioned is refocusing our proactive heritage inventory work. And this starts with taking a strategic approach to how we now use the register and what we list on it. And as a result of the limitations we now have for listing, really the properties that we would be adding on the register should be ones that have some immediate threat of potential demolition or redevelopment. And if there's an imminent prescribed event, and so a good idea of how this might happen is we have a formal consultation application process for property redevelopment. So if as a part of that FC process, we know that a prescribed event is potentially coming in the near future, then we want to make sure that property is listed on the register before that prescribed event is triggered. The second and larger component of how we take action and we focus our inventory work is the development of a Heritage Conservation District strategy and work plan. So in addition to the 166 properties currently on our work plan that we need to try to figure out how to deal with, we have those other 2,200 or so on the register that we flagged as having some heritage value or interest, but not necessarily as candidates for individual designation. So how do we address those concentrations of properties? And the development of an HCD strategy and work plan would allow us to look at some of the work we've already done as a part of our proactive built heritage inventory work and identify areas that might be candidates for new district review and designation. And as well, there's a few outstanding pieces that have been flagged over the years, requests in the past for potential districts, as well as council direction that should be rolled into this future strategy and work plan. So on the screen and the presentation slides, the three that are bolded are ones that we actually do have some council direction to report back on. That would be an HCD for Gore Park, for Waterdown Village, and for Ravenscliff Avenue. And then the additional ones in Kester Village, the Charlton, Houston, Forest John Block, and James Street North. Those are where we currently have some concentrations of properties that might be candidates for a district designation. And then the final two are actually items that have been referred to a future cultural heritage landscape inventory and management plan. So those have been flagged as a preliminary list, and obviously there might be more that would come forward as a part of a future report on how to approach this work moving forward. And then one just final action, this is really a rolling over of an existing policy and direction in terms of requirements for notices of intention to demolish properties that are listed on our register. We currently have council direction in place that we're able to require an applicant, an owner, provide a cultural heritage impact assessment with a submission of their notice of intention to demolish a property that is both listed on the register and on our existing work plan. And since we're getting rid of our existing work plan, we want to ensure that we apply that same requirement to properties that will now be on our new candidates list and high priority list. Building off of that, though, recognizing that, that's great for those properties that are designation candidates, but we currently don't have a standard process for how we receive notices of intention to demolish listed properties on the register. So it would be worthwhile to move forward with a recommendation to standardize that process, and that would include an application form that we would require people to fill out as a part of providing that notice under the Heritage Act. Okay, I know that was a lot, and there's probably a lot to dig into, but just in summary, in terms of everything I've gone over and how that is reflected in the recommendations of the report, recommendation A is the recommendation to essentially end our existing designation process. Recommendations B and C would help implement this new public list of candidates for Part 4 designation, and that's attached as Appendix A again, and would also provide for staff to continue to maintain that public list. Recommendation D of the report is the direction for staff to review those 60 high priority candidates for designation and to do that work before they're delisted on January 1st, 2025. And that list is Appendix B of the report. Recommendations E and H would deal with that notice requirement process for listed properties and standardizing that, as well as carrying over that CHIA requirement for those properties that we flagged as candidates to be designated. Recommendation F of the report is the direction for staff to report back with that HCD strategy and work plan. And then recommendation G, the final recommendation, would basically clear up a few outstanding business list items that are really addressed by not just this report, but also the legislative changes that have prompted it. And in terms of our next steps, so there's obviously a lot of work to do, like most municipalities are currently being faced with, who are looking at their existing register and how they approach it. Moving forward, we'll be hiring 2 temporary contracts to address that high priority designation work over the next 2 years. We're going to have to do a lot of administrative updates to our website and our databases. As outlined in the report, we'll obviously be notifying owners of the changes to our existing designation work plan if advised for approval through this group and up to council. And as per the recommendations, we'll be reporting back on both a standard demo notice process as well as an HD strategy and a work plan. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you folks might have.
Thanks for that report. I'm sure there'll be many questions. I'll keep my 2 questions brief. On item D, I said it seems like there's a lot of fluidity there, and so I want to just identify that. There's a difference between obviously implementing and reviewing, right? And so item D, the cultural heritage planning staff be directed to review the high priority properties of cultural heritage value or interest and come back to council with recommendations no later than January 1st. And so what I presume that means is like, okay, over the course of the next couple of years, that those 60 properties will go through a process and you'll come forward to council with them, but that like something could change in there where you decide, okay, we thought this was but then we decided something else was. So that's why it's structured in this way, I imagine, right?
Through the chair, yes. So there is an ability, obviously, for us to adapt, and the report goes into a little bit more detail of, in addition to these 60 high priorities, we're going to have prescribed event trigger designations. There's going to be a need to be able to bring forward recommendations as quickly as possible in timely manner.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I just wanted to flag that because I know there's a difference there between the 2. Second question is about notice of intention to demolish. So I'm really grateful that you're having a standardized process for that, because I know right now it can happen sometimes very formally and sometimes super informally, right? And that the legibility for people who are not familiar with these processes depends on their familiarity with planning overall. Will you be establishing criteria? So I know that you will, will the form have a set of criteria on it that people are like tick boxes and things to fill out? But then what part of the planning process or what part of how will they know the form exists? Like, I know you said there's going to be a form, but how will they know that it exists?
Yeah, great question through the chair. So currently we do have information on our website. So if you look up the Municipal Heritage Register on the city's website, there's information specifically about that requirement for designation candidates on the work plan that are listed and that CHIA requirement. We would typically flag things as a part of the development application process. So if there's a formal consultation and there's some redevelopment, we would speak to the requirements as well related to giving notice. When we list properties on the register, we also provide that notice to the owners both before we list them and after in terms of those requirements. So there is an existing dialogue that takes place, but I do hear what you're saying, and that's part of why moving forward, having a clear application form and being able to direct people to that will help further clarify that process.
Through you, Madam Chairman. In addition, we've linked the process to the demolition permit process. So many people will start with the demolition permit. And one of the questions are, did you check on the heritage status, which will then, as Ms. Golden indicated, then we land you on the heritage aspects of the page. But we're using, I think most people will start the process, what do I need to get a demo permit? And through that initial pre-screening, it'll help to flag it for a property owner that they realize they may have a heritage property and they need to get into the heritage stream before they get into the demolition permit stream. Thank you.
That's really helpful. So you'll be working with building. I would also just encourage, throw it out there, that as you roll this out and there's opportunities for training, because that's always what happens in these situations, right? There's an opportunity to say, hey, there's a new tool in the toolbox. Like, how do we use the tool? Please invite municipal law enforcement to that conversation, because I feel like they're sometimes the first call or the first indication that something is going on in a heritage property. And if they know, oh, okay, wait a minute, there's this form, maybe fill it out, and they haven't, that can act as like an efficiency that will save everybody a lot of time. So just my 2 cents. Thank you for this work.
Janice, you're next.
I cannot give you through the chair, I cannot give you the page number because when I printed, there are no page numbers. So I'll try to give you the topic. I'm on your master presentation to us, okay?
Through the chair to Janice, the page numbers of the staff report itself are in the header at the top of the
Not on
page.
mine. Where? Oh, there it is. Thank you. I'm also blind. I'm sorry. I'm looking here in the corner where I normally see pages. Okay, I now can tell you what I want. So let's go to, I do have a couple questions so I can ask, and then if I could come back, I don't want to monopolize the time. Okay, page 10 of 14. And it has to do with the vulnerability of properties that can slip through the crack. And there is something that you explain in the third, in a paragraph, you say, in both of the above situations, the requirement for an owner to enter into a heritage easement or covenant agreement as a condition of approval of their application may be a solution. How significant, I think this is, I look at this one, this prescribed events, I think this is a really horrendous situation. And I see a lot of buildings possibly falling through the cracks. So what does that mean, and how significant is it going to really be to ensure that we conserve properties that might slip through the crack because we've lost them because of the 5-year thing and everything else that's going on? Thank you. That's my first.
Thanks, Janice. Through the chair. So the limitations related to prescribed events are for municipalities to be able to designate under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, issue a notice of intention to designate within 90 days. But there are obviously other tools that we can use to ensure conservation. In some cases, it might be just a part of the regular back and forth of what's being proposed for an application and then what the final scope of work ends up being. If it's potentially a zoning bylaw amendment type of application, we could require as a condition, potentially a holding condition of approval to require them to enter into a heritage easement agreement. I'm not saying that that's always possible in every situation, but that is another tool available to us that we have used before. And I will also note that although we, as far as I'm aware, we haven't yet had an applicant actually enter into one of these, but there is an opportunity to delay or essentially cancel the 90-day timeline if both parties agree to it. We do have a standard form that we provide as a part of the formal consultation process when we flag that there might be a prescribed event to an applicant that they could willingly enter into if they're willing to have a conversation and dialogue and work towards, a reasonable solution. But but obviously that would be at their discretion if they wanted to enter into that mutual agreement.
Through the chair, is that what you mean by the covenant agreement?
Through the chair, no, actually, that's separate. So the easement or covenant agreement is a provision of the Ontario Heritage Act. So municipalities, as well as the province, are able to enter into these types of heritage conservation agreements with property owners. So that would be a separate thing.
And the word is may. May.
May. Yes, correct.
Thank you. Okay. Second question. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, now I'm on page 11 of 14. Okay, and amendments to existing pre-2005 designation bylaws. We know that that is now on hold because of your horrendous workload and all the changes that are going on. We also know that pre-2005 designation bylaws are not what our bylaws are today, and we have had some issues, and there may be other issues moving forward depending on how clever the owner, the proponent, whoever is, and whether or not they know exactly what they are able to do or not do. So with regard to heritage permits, property would still have to go to permit review, but how will we deal with those designations, knowing that we can't do anything to improve upon them now? Will there be stricter rules in place to protect our heritage designated buildings pre-2005? Thank you.
Through the chair to Janice, yeah, thank you for flagging that component of it. So as you may recall, when these issues had come up with a few specific cases that we've been dealing with, we did have a conversation about just how the older bylaws were being interpreted and improving upon that, and reaching out to our colleagues in legal services to ensure that we are appropriately interpreting the older quote unquote reasons for designation bylaws versus ones that have been enacted under the current legislation, where we have a clear description of heritage attributes and sort of how staff are interpreting that. So we did hear those concerns previously, and that is the way that we've been moving forward for the time since that point, in terms of ensuring with those older bylaws that we are interpreting them as conservatively and strictly as possible, and also consulting with our legal services staff to ensure that we are following the letter of the law when we're interpreting what may or may not require a heritage permit.
Thank you. I'll come back again after the next speaker.
So right now, the next speaker I have on my list is Graham. And actually, if we can just update our speakers list. Robin, you had your hand up.
So Robin after Graham, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, the report, which was excellent, left me with two questions. The first being, if we were to remove properties from the register right now, does that allow us to put them back on before the 5 years comes up?
Through the chair to Graham, thank you for the question. It is something that has been discussed amongst heritage planners across Ontario. I believe folks are taking different perspectives on that, but the legal interpretation that we've gotten of the legislation and the provisions is that that would not change the 5-year restriction. That would still come into play.
Damn. Okay, and after reading the report and your review of it, what role would the inventory and research working group have in future?
Great question, through the chair to Graham. And we did have a preliminary conversation with Inventory and Research at their January meeting about the draft recommendations before bringing this report forward. So obviously there won't be, assuming that the existing process is rescinded, there won't be draft heritage assessment reports being brought through Inventory and Research for review. But there is a lot of other work that's being done by the working group. There are a few larger initiatives like the places of worship inventory, which I know has been on hold previously as well, the places of education inventory, as well as one-off sort of individual properties that have been flagged for potential review. That is still extremely valuable, relevant work to be doing. And I think there's potentially an opportunity to conduct a lot of the background research that would assist staff moving forward with not just new properties that might be flagged under immediate threat, but also properties that are on the larger candidate list that we won't necessarily be getting to unless they're triggered. If there's an opportunity to work through those things proactively and to come up with the background research so that we can act as quickly as possible if something does move forward, that would be very helpful.
Robin, you're next.
Through the chair, the question is that my two properties that I put in for designation took 10 years to designate, and I was approached by the city to have an easement on the properties instead of designation, and it would still protect it. And I said, no, I want a designation. And this is a timely thing here. So why could you not put an easement on all 60 properties? It would take time to do all that, but that would make it a protection again, which is less than designation, but it is still a protection. Is that feasible?
So through the chair to Robin, a couple of comments. So municipalities are able to both designate properties as well as enter into heritage easement agreements to conserve properties. Designation under the Heritage Act can take place without owner's consent. So council, as advised by its Heritage Committee and staff, can direct us to issue a notice of intention to designate, and then there's a formal appeal and objection process that would then be carried through before we actually pass a bylaw. For a heritage easement agreement, which is similar in terms of the scale of research and evaluation we should be doing before we decide to move forward with that protection, is something that needs to be entered into willingly by the property owner that it would be protecting. So that is a possibility to still be able to negotiate heritage easement agreements. There is, though, the same amount of research that we should be doing. It would require the owner to enter into it and want to enter into it. And there'd also be an additional, potentially larger component of administrative work on our legal services side to focus primarily on easements as well. So there's a few things to think about there in terms of those implications. I will note, though, in terms of the effectiveness of protection, they are similar in terms of identifying what is of value on a property, what attributes are protected, and requiring an owner receive approval from the city before altering those heritage attributes. But there are differences in terms of appeal rights. So a heritage easement can actually be more restrictive and protective of a property than a designation, which can be appealed to the OLT.
Robin, did you have any further questions? Or?
Sorry. Yes, I do. Through you, the chair, the list of the 60 properties that you plan on a high priority, two of them I notice are already not high priorities. One is Central Presbyterian Church. It's not going anywhere. And the other one is the pub on King Street. New development there. The developer has decided to keep that building, so there is no demolition problem there. And if you do designate it, then he'll have problems restoring it for his entranceway to the new property. So yeah, you plan on doing these 60 designations in 2 years? That's the question.
Through the chair to Robin. So first on the two properties. So we have certainly seen, not just only in Hamilton, but across Ontario, across North America, challenges and issues in terms of places of worship and sustainability. So there is generally, for places of worship, a potential more perceived threat of demolition or change in terms of the, the state of these properties currently more generally. So that's part of why that particular one is currently on the high priority list. In terms of the 537 King Street East, Rebel Rock, so that was specifically requested. It is in a state of flux and change in terms of the development application process. We are working through a current proposal and application which does proposed to retain the building, which is fantastic. But that is still under some immediate threat of change. So that was the rationale for this to still be on the high priority list, because we may result in designation even with the proposed redevelopment. And I'm sorry, I forgot the second part already of what your question was. Oh, can we do all 60? Thank you.
I did plan on doing the 60 in 2 years.
Yes, so in the body of the report, under the staffing implications section, there is a bit of a discussion in terms of how we anticipate to do that. So we have had a few contracts over the last few years, mostly student-led contracts through Young Canada Works, that have demonstrated the ability of conducting this type of research and preparation of designation reports in-house in a timely manner. And so based on the experience with those contracts and what we're proposing in terms of 2 new contracts, we do think that we could get through those 60 within the 2 years, and that we would, each of the new 2 contract staff we're looking to hire could do about 15 per year each.
That is very optimistic, through the chair. That's 30 per year, and you've got these new 2 people doing 15 a year. So you have to do 2.5 a month, and this is the end of February. You're already 5 behind.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you for pointing that out, Robin. Yes, unfortunately, we obviously were playing catch up to the bill having been reclaimed in January. We have been working on the strategy for a bit. We do currently have a heritage intern on staff who was originally hired as a part of the downtown Dundas Built Heritage Inventory. There are a number of Dundas properties on the work plan, and a number of these are already almost completed. So we are on track for that timeline.
That's great news.
If Robin is finished with his questions, I have Janice as second-time speaker.
Through the chair, one of my questions has already been answered, so that is terrific. Is it possible to look at one of the recommendations? Can I make a comment about that? Thank you. Okay, so that would be on the covering page. It doesn't have a number on it. I'm sorry, number C, and you are going to be reporting, or it's been suggested that you're going to report back to us quarterly, and that will be made publicly available. I think quarterly is not enough time personally. Can you change, would you consider changing that to maybe every 2 months to keep us update? Quarterly is like every 4 months, and that's a long time.
3 months.
3 months, that's a long time. How about monthly? I'd like it monthly. I mean, if truth be known, thank you. I was concerned about that, just to keep on track.
Through the chair to Janice, so that's part of also, in terms from a transparency perspective, the list would be available at any point for the committee members or the public to be able to access, but that we would be reporting back in terms of any changes or updates at a quarterly rate, if that seems reasonable.
Thank you, Alyssa. That's very reasonable. A lot of these questions are basically just for clarification, by the way. I'm not trying to make your job difficult. And the last one, looking at your suggestions for priority, staff suggestions for priority, many of them, of course, I agree with. I haven't had a chance to look closely at everything, but could these change with input from the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee? Are you open to suggestions?
Through the chair, so yes, moving forward, if there's specific questions about properties at this point, before this moves forward to council, happy to have those conversations now. And I have the slides broken down if you'd like me to pull up by community, for example, what's high versus just the longer list. But moving forward in terms of that new designation request process, if there is something that is currently on the candidates list that you've identified a potential threat for and a need for it to be a high priority, and you want to request it be looked at sooner, or if there's a new property that isn't currently on either of the lists that you're requesting, then we would be following that process that I had outlined in the presentation.
And that also includes HCDs and cultural heritage landscapes, because I'm still not clear fully about how that might work, because it hasn't really been fleshed out. Thank you.
Through the chair to Janice, yes, that is still something that we as staff are also working out in terms of what that process will be, what sort of engagement we'll be doing leading up to actually bringing forward the strategy and what that final strategy is. So if there's any feedback in the meantime, whether that's sent directly to myself or staff to discuss, or if it's something that we work through either at this level or at the inventory and research working group level, happy to have those conversations in the meantime.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Any other questions in regards to the presentation? Councillor, go ahead.
Thanks. I had two more questions. I just didn't want to take up too much time at the beginning to ask them. The first one I think is easy. The second one I think is probably tricky. So, no, I'm lying. They're both tricky. So I'm always a fan of trying to quantify the gesturable. What I mean by that is when we say it's going to be really difficult for us to, impossible for us to get all 2,400 properties, right, designated in that time frame. I'm always saying, okay, cool, but like what would it take to do that? I'm not suggesting we can do that, but I think it'd be useful for us to be able to quantify that so that when we're taking this to council to have a conversation, we can say, look, it would require expanding the department to 100 staff, and it would cost us, $45 million, like whatever that looks like, right? Because I think that part of the download that's happening here is in an ideal universe, if municipalities had tons of resources and could do this work, then we could just take on doing the work and say, okay, the province is demanding we do this and they're going to fund it. And they're going to send us $65 million to do it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think it's useful to quantify these things. And if there's a way of doing that, I think that would be a helpful visual for the public and for council to understand in terms of what the impact of this download is and what the provincial government is essentially doing. Saying if you could only really complete this if you had these resources.
Through the chair to the councillor, it's a good question. So part of why the staff focus recommendation of addressing Bill 23 in the immediate short term is the work plan is that we are actually a bit of ahead of the game in terms of some other municipalities that have also done proactive inventory listing or register listing. We, as a part of our process, have screened the properties and we've specifically identified those that are candidates to be Part 4 designated under the Heritage Act. So that's why we're able to say, okay, these are our immediate priorities. This is what we need to do to address Part 4 designations. For the remainder of the listed properties that will be delisted in 2 years, they're not necessarily candidates for Part 4 designation, and that's where that reporting back and potentially that's where that conversation might come in terms of what do we actually need to address these potential new heritage districts that could protect these areas of properties that we've identified. So I'll take that note back in terms of how we move forward with that strategy and present it.
Through you, Madam Chair, but I think we could do it back to the envelope calculation. As some of those properties, if there's enough of a cluster, may fall into a district, which would have a different per unit cost than if each of the properties is, it's isolated from the other property, which would then have to go through that initial vetting to determine is it worth moving to a designation. So, but I mean, I think maybe in time for planning committee when this Heritage Committee report hits Planning Committee, we can share with the member what we think would be an order of magnitude, because you are correct. In many ways, this is downloading by stealth as it relates to heritage conservation amongst of other measures. And it is an interesting, I like the numbers too, just to generate that statistic to say how much is it costing us in order to respond to these changes, because there are costs associated with those legislative changes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because I think that maybe while we're having these conversations here at a subcommittee, we're able to maybe wrangle with this, but the minute it leaves here and starts going to a wider audience, those figures may be very helpful in people understanding it. Second question is more of a procedural question, I guess. So I think I read somewhere, heard somewhere, and through various reporting of the Heritage Committee, there's this kind of thing that happens with the ward councillor. So maybe this is a political question, so I'm trying not to make it one, but I'm doing my best. So what I'm saying is, say there's a property in Ward 7, right? And the Ward 7 councillor says, hey, like we should do something with this property with respect to heritage designation, right? And they contact people, right? Or somebody else says it, and then we contact the Ward 7 councillor. I guess what I want to understand is like what the relationship of ward councillors is to the process of designation, if there is one, and does this committee have a similar function? So for instance, if someone on this committee should bring forward, because I'm new to this committee, so I don't really know, if someone on this committee brings forward, hey, we think we should designate this property, right? And it comes up here, and then you investigate it and bring it back as part of your work plan. Like, how do councillors and their offices work in that same or similar or different way?
Through the chair of the councillor, so our existing designation process and what is proposed to replace it wants to ensure that whatever requests we get from whoever it might come from for designation, as long as they are legitimate, the properties have potential heritage value or interest, that we're addressing those appropriately. And similar to our existing process and what's being proposed moving forward, we want to ensure that the ward councillor of the area that those properties are located in are kept up to date and are aware, especially when we're dealing with recommendations for or requests for designation that don't come directly from the property owner. They come from a third party, whether that is Heritage Committee, another member of the public, directed from council. To recognizing that that could be a contentious recommendation, we might have to deal with potential appeals or objections. We always want to make sure that the councillor is aware, understand what their perspective is, so that that is also incorporated into whatever staff reports we bring forward.
Thanks. I think that answers my question. I just wanted to make sure this committee also has kind of an ability, as there's a fluidity to the process, right, to bring things forward, right? So should there be a situation where there's a building and people think, oh gosh, this is really a big priority, or it's emerged as a priority because, like, I don't know, a wall fell down, or I don't know what how these things are done, but something happened internally to the building, and so now it's more of a priority. This committee could bring it forward and say, oh gosh, you know, maybe this should be one of the 60. That's a thing that can happen, right? And hopefully it happens here.
Yeah, it's just through the chair to the councillor. Yes, certainly. I mean, there's been proactive conversations for buildings that aren't under threat as well, that just maybe have been highlighted and people have noticed this wonderful, significant building has never been protected. Sometimes it comes out of that approach. But I would say the majority of the properties that are discussed and brought up specifically by this committee and by the working groups generally are ones that maybe are under some threat of potential demolition or change. And that is usually the trigger for that conversation to happen.
Great. As the council rep, I think what I'll do is I'll reach out to my colleagues and just say, hey, if there's something that comes up in your thing, send it here, right, for correspondence so that we can have a discussion here about it. That's more what I'm concerned about, is that this committee have a chance to look at these things and consider them, because it's a committee that's regularly reviewing these kinds of properties. And a one-off from a councillor may not have the same knowledge or understanding. So thanks so much. I appreciate that.
And through the chair, maybe back to Cameron, we had a case very recently where members of the neighborhood contacted me because I was affiliated with the Durand Neighborhood Association, and I think there were 3 people, and they were all concerned with the property. And that stimulated this coming to this committee, and then eventually to inventory and research, and to get that work done. So if you have organized community groups that are very engaged in their community, many times you'll get that information will come that way. And most recently, a community member brought forward Philpott, something that we're going to talk about today. So I guess it's education and keeping everybody informed. Yeah. Newsletter article, Cameron?
Are there any other questions in regards to Alyssa's presentation? Go ahead, Robin. Robin, I think you're muted.
Sorry, you have prioritized these properties down to the 60s. And are you going to prioritize the 60 as to which is the one that happens first? That's the list that we had before.
Through the chair to Robin. So once we get past this stage of, you know, the proposed changes to our heritage designation process going through council and being approved, and we're able to onboard staff, there'll obviously be an additional conversation moving forward in terms of how we then divvy up this work and what are the first year priorities within that. And I think, yes, one important factor to look at will be anything that has active applications or active threat potentially, but also what were the previous prioritizations and reasons for those in the former work plan, and whether we should be accounting for that as well in terms of our strategy moving forward.
Thank you.
Any other questions in regards to the presentation? If not, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation?
I see Robin and I see Graham.
Is there anyone opposed to receiving the presentation? Seeing none, we now move on to the report. So we have the staff report ahead of us with the recommendations that Alyssa has outlined. Is there any questions in regards to the report? If not, may I have a mover and a seconder to bring forward the recommendations?
I see Karen and I see Lynn.
Okay. If there's no discussion, may I have a motion, that motion to approve the recommendations? Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Thank you again, Alyssa, for all of that work on that report. That was. As we move forward, item 5.1.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
So item 5.1 is a communication item from Devin Thompson respecting the Philpott Memorial Church, 84 York Boulevard in Hamilton. So we have this as a communication item today. Are there any questions or discussion? Janice?
Yes, I'd like to bring this forward for discussion. We had this verbally presented at our last meeting, and I think, Alyssa, you contacted Devin and you asked him if he would submit a formal letter, which he did do, and he is asking, he does believe that this property is in well, we do know that there has been a formal consultation. We do know that there perhaps are plans to demolish, and we've got a concept drawing of 2 towers with a podium in the middle. And this property, it was built in 1906. According to Devin, I'm not sure about this might require more research work. He says it was designed by Charles Mills. That does not say that in our inventory work in the places of worship. It says it doesn't know who the architect is, so that would have to be checked on. Regardless, it is an outstanding building. It did suffer some fire damage in, I think, 1954, 62, and there were extensive renovations, and that they covered the original brick building with stone cladding. I think they did some work in the interior and a little bit of work on the front stairs. However, we do know that cladding can be removed, so that could be brought back to its to the way it certainly looked in the day when it was built in 1906. And there are many other reasons for designation. So knowing that we've had Bill 23, we can't put it on the register, knowing that there has been a formal consultation, no application for development yet, but this property seems to me to be one that is in harm's way and could certainly be lost to us if we do not add it to staff's designation work plan. It'll be up to this committee to decide whether or not we follow through with this. His request is that we do that. Thank you.
Alyssa, did you want to comment?
Yeah, through the chair to Janice. So just on the note in terms of the architect, I believe we received research more recently, I believe from Rob Hamilton in terms of the architect. So that's where that's coming from, and that's why that's not in the previous places of worship inventory research. So this property is already listed on the register. So if a prescribed event is triggered, we do have that 90-day option to proceed with designation. As I think we mentioned at the last meeting, there was a formal consultation application. Staff did request a cultural heritage impact assessment be prepared by the applicant in support of any future applications they bring forward. Given what staff has recommended and this committee advised move forward to council in terms of changes to our work plan, what I would suggest is if you did want to move a motion in terms of pursuing designation of the property, that it would be a motion to recommend that staff review the property for Part 4 designation.
I can make that motion. Moved by myself, seconded by Graham. Carol, thank you very much.
Just a second, Janice. Getting ahead of yourself.
May I first get a motion to receive the piece of correspondence, and then we can move on to the brand new motion.
So we have before us the piece of correspondence. We need a mover and a seconder to receive. So Graham, Janice, or Lynn?
I see Graham and Lynn.
Is there anyone opposed to receiving? Next, we have Janice. We have your motion.
Oh, thank you. So moved by myself, Janice Brown, seconded by Graham Carroll, that this property be, be,
The wording that I have for the motion is that it be added, it be referred to staff to review the property for future designation? Sorry, help me out here as well.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, my mic was acting up. Yes, that this committee requests that staff review the property for Part 4 designation.
Thank you very much, Alyssa. And I would just like to say it's really difficult to present motions off the top of your head. They take some work and some writing. So I do apologize for my inability to present an appropriate motion. Sorry about that, folks.
So Janice has put it forward. You have a seconder, Larry?
I believe Graham was seconding. Thank you, Jan.
So that motion's now on the table. Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item that is carried. On consent items?
Could I have a discussion?
Sorry, that was my doing, Madam Chair. I did not see Robin with his hand up during the discussion of the motion.
Oh, go ahead, Robin. Sorry about that.
We have a list of 60 properties. Now we've put another one on. So is it 61 or does one on the list drop off? And because this is a church, does it change with Central Presbyterian? So now we got a church for a church? And we stick with the 60? Or can we add more onto the 60, which is, I don't think it's the right way to go. It's too much work.
Through the chair to Robin. So the 60 list of high priority properties that this committee recommended approval of as part of the previous item would not change. The motion that just passed was a recommendation or a request for staff to review this new property for Part 4 designation. So as per the new designation process outlined in the staff report, staff will report back on that to this committee. So if in looking at it, determine that it is worthy of Part 4 designation, we would be bringing forward a recommendation report in regards to that. So I guess administratively, that list does not change, but similar to, as I spoke to in the staff presentation for item 8.1, as new potential designations are brought forward, whether that's a part of a prescribed event or otherwise, we would follow this process in terms of reporting through this committee and up to council in a timely manner.
Does that answer your question, Robin? Or did you have anything further?
Because we did 60 and now we added another one, where does that fit in the priority list? The idea is that if you can only do 60 in the 2 years, and now we added a 61, it needs to have a space in that priority. Is it number 1 in the priority list because it is in danger of demolition? Or is it at the bottom, 59?
Through the chair to Robin, so there is currently no prioritization of the high priority list. So there's no additional ranking of that currently. So as we receive new requests or if new prescribed events trigger requirements for a staff to review designations, those obviously, if there's a time sensitive manner to those will be done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that answers the question. So it is number 1 in the priority list because of the issue of demolition. Thank you.
If there's no other questions, we'll move on to our consent items. So we have several consent items on our agenda today. So we have items 9.1 to 9.3. Are there any questions in regards to those items? If there's no discussion, may I have a mover and a seconder to receive those items?
I see Councillor Kretsch and I see Janice.
And is there anyone opposed? No one opposed. That item is carried. We move on to item 10.1 under our discussion items, which is our inventory and research working group notes. I just want to maybe flag in light of the presentation, staff presentation, if the committee wishes to reconsider recommendations that are in these meeting notes, we should discuss that.
Through the chair, so staff had flagged this, just these can move forward as is, but in light of the presentation in terms of our new designation process that's being proposed that will hopefully be approved by council as this moves forward, as well as our need to be more strategic about listing. This was just an opportunity, recognizing that the recommendations in this working group meeting notes were based on our previous process. So if there is a desire to modify the recommendations to align with how we are looking to change our process, then this would be the time to have that conversation.
Go ahead, Graham.
Would it be worthwhile we don't consider these working group minutes or notes right now and send it back to the working group to review the recommendations before it comes back to the main committee?
What would we do with these? Through the chair, what would we do with these? We know that they're prominent buildings. We know that they definitely, we agreed that they definitely deserve this attention. So would there be another holding venue for these? So if anything were to happen, we could, if there were a prescribed event, we could bring them up. Thank you.
Through the chair, Janice, great question. So in terms of the two recommendations in the notes, the first is related to a number of relatively stable residential properties that were determined to have heritage value or interest. These are proposed to be listed on the register. So as we discussed in the previous presentation, there's a need to be strategic here. So these could still be listed on the register, but they will automatically be removed 2 years from their listing. So they wouldn't have that long-term flagging. So that could move forward as is, or you could potentially rescind that recommendation or change that recommendation to not list them, but they would just be on our inventory. For the second recommendation regarding 922 Main Street East, as far as I understand, there is immediate concern about this property, which right now is only on our inventory. It has recently been through a planning act application process, and there is a conditionally approved site plan, but I believe the concern raised about this was that there was a real estate listing in spite of that recent approval. So there's a two-part recommendation for that one. Currently, it's being recommended to be listed on the register, as well as added to our current designation work plan as a high priority. So in light of your concerns, I think A still makes sense to list it on the register. In terms of B, you could potentially modify that or amend that recommendation so that staff be directed or request that staff review that property for Part 4 designation rather than it being added to a work plan, which we're about to rescind.
Through the chair, I can definitely agree with keeping A, because we do know that it is undergoing change, but I think we have good feelings about it, but I can't obviously say that. But definitely remove it from the staff's work list to designate. And as far as the modernist buildings, if we put it on the register, it's going to come off anyway, but at least we've got that material. And at this point in time, it doesn't make any difference, really, because they're going to come off anyway. So in other words, what do we do with it? I hate to just throw it out with all the work that's been done. There was a tremendous amount of work done by this person. So my recommendation would be we keep it as is.
Issue, right? Lori?
If I may, Madam Chair, ask for some clarification through you.
Yeah, through the chair. I'm just was wondering if we don't do nothing and do not list it, have it listed on the register now, because there doesn't seem to be any threat to any of these buildings. After January 1st, 2025, we could potentially put it on asked to put it on a register, right?
So, okay, through the chair to Lynn. So these would be new register listings. So if this committee recommends that these 4 properties be listed on the register in item 1 in these meeting notes, and council approves that, then they will be listed on the register at the time of council approving that. And then 2 years from that approval date, they would be removed.
Through you, Madam Chairman, but that is a good suggestion and a pending pending registry list that in the event of properties we feel is threatened or should be moved up onto the registry, they could be elevated at a future point in time, but almost like a bill gets first, second, and third reading at the provincial level. We might do a first and second reading to add properties to the registry, but just hold it in abeyance until we actually uplift it to the registry. So it may be an inventory plus list where it's sort of on the inventory moving towards the registry, but not on the registry at this point in time as a strategic response to dealing with the legislative changes. So that is sort of a plan B that we've sort of been thinking about as staff that may sort of work that address the issue, and it's sort of something that needs to be further flushed out as to how we would develop that list and maintain that list. But essentially it would be high priority inventory properties that are migrating towards the registry at an appropriate point in time, and might be something that gets revisited on a semi-annual basis or something to make that determination. Just an idea, but it's just something that I've been thinking about, and thank you for raising the idea.
Listening to both Steve and Lynn, that really makes a lot of sense because we're going to continue to get these properties. So there's got to be some place to store them.
Through the chair, so I guess what you could amend the recommendation to would be that this committee advises that these properties are worthy of listing on the register for the reasons that are currently already in the motion or already in the recommendation. And then that way we wouldn't have to come back through Heritage Committee if we needed to add these in a timely manner, because we are legislatively required to consult before addition. So then that way we could go directly to council because we would have already consulted on this committee's desire or belief that these are worthy of listing.
So that wording would change. The Inventory and Research Working Group advises that the following properties are worthy of being on the register and should, or can we just leave it at that? This is difficult.
Through the chair to Janice, I think you would leave it at that, but you would still need to keep the preamble of why they have heritage value or interest, because that is also required under the Act.
Okay, so that would be due to their physical design value as unique and exceptional examples of modernist design and historical associated value based on their association with Jerome Markson, prominent Canadian architect recognized for his modernist architectural design. I think that is good. Thank you.
So that's for recommendation 1.
Yes. And then recommendation 2 is to remove.
I would recommend amending B to amending B to the following. This, subsection B read that staff review for part 4 of designation, which is similar to the language we used in the other reference. Staff review for part 4 designation. I'm getting a nod. I think I've understood. We will wordsmith the recommendation for item 1 of the working group notes, but those will also be amended.
Okay.
Through the chair, yes, I do understand what's happening. I was just thinking about it procedurally, which is what I do.
So with the amendments that we've made,
If I may, through the chair, 2 actions are needed. A vote on the amendments, and then a vote on the item as amended. So the first item will be the amendments that we've just made.
So can I have a mover and a seconder to suggest those amendments?
I see Robin and I see Tim, just giving them a break.
And is there anyone opposed to those amendments? No, seeing none, and then we are voting on the recommendations as amended.
I see Lynn and I see Janice.
And is there anyone opposed to the amended? Seeing none, that item is carried. See, we got through that, no problem. Great. General information? Or general information? So you will notice that the list looks a little different this month.
Very nice.
Little,
So clear.
little reorganization, never hurt anybody, see? So everything is listed by the areas now. So if by show of hands, if anyone has any properties that they'd like to report on? Go ahead, Liz.
If I may, through the chair, just note, so in terms of some of the questions at the previous meeting, in terms of the format of this and the status of these properties, staff have reviewed all of the properties on the buildings of landscapes list that this committee reviews, confirmed the heritage status, confirmed that all of them do have at least inventoried, registered, or designated status, and they are flagged in our internal systems as well for building and municipal law enforcement staff for their information. And then we also just organize them by community, so it's a little bit clearer in terms of how you run through them.
So now if we can get a speakers list for properties, this is also the time if there's any additions or deletions from the list to get those ready as well. So I've got Graham, I see Janice,
Robin, yep.
Tim. Okay, so go ahead, Graham.
I just wonder if anyone read in the paper about Century Manor being discussed once again. It looks like the province may or may not have a proposal to sell that land. But there's no promises on what's being done with Century Manor, unfortunately. So we don't know what status with the province or what its development status will be.
Oh, through the chair, sorry, I didn't know if we needed to comment, just that obviously staff are working on an updated amendment to the designation bylaw to reflect the conversations that we've previously had, recognizing that there is, in theory, a sale that will be imminent and ensuring that a new bylaw is passed to protect the landscape features of the property as well.
Janice, you're next on the list.
Yes, I think mostly I have questions of the staff. 6668 Charlton Avenue West, there is a work order to comply. Is there any update on what's happening with that work order?
Through the chair to Janice, I don't think we've had any, I believe that there were staff that were out to confirm that work wasn't taking place without a building permit. I think that has all stopped. I don't think there's active, other than just monitoring vacant building at this point. So no formal updates on staff side for that.
I saw nothing except the sign on the door saying work order to comply. I'm really happy that we had a snowstorm. 163 Jackson Street West, Pinehurst, Television City. I do not have to look at the garbage. Every day one walks by there, there is nothing but garbage. And I understood that it was to be cleaned up regularly, so the snow right now has taken care of it. Thank you. 98 James Street South. I know that we've got a conditional permit on it until March. Is there anything to report, Steve, on that?
Through you, Madam Chairman, planning staff did have a meeting with the new owners. And they were concerned about the heritage permit only being extended till March. And part of the reason for that interim extension was to provide an opportunity to meet with the owners and better understand their plans. They did indicate that they are committed to proceeding with the development concept that was previously approved, and that they are doing their internal costing exercise, marketing exercises, and interior revisions to the architectural design. But they do anticipate in proceeding with the project as approved by council in terms of the site-specific zoning and as shown on the previous site plans, which would the restoration retention of the existing portion of the building and then the new tower. We did flag for them there were some concerns about the site being open and people gaining access to the site, and the fear that there might be some damage done to the building, and they were going to revisit the site. They were going to attend the site and ensure that the fencing and the other security measures are in place to protect it from any inadvertent damage or destruction occurring to the property. So we were waiting then hopefully to re-engage with them sometime in March and issue a further extension to the heritage permit. They were seeking it be extended at least to the end of the calendar year in order to assist them with their financing, but they do seem to be a fairly sophisticated development group that are the new owners, and we're confident that hopefully this time it'll stick and we will ultimately see the property. And in the interim, but they did acknowledge that there are concerns on the property standards issue with the site, and they were fully cognizant of those and committed to resolving those issues as well.
So Hui is gone. Hui is gone. Gone. Thank you.
Yes, the current owners, as I understand it, were actually sort of silent partners with the previous ownership group. So they were fully familiar with the project. And when they had the opportunity to acquire the development site, they took advantage of that development opportunity. Sorry, the name is escaping me right now, the name of the group. It starts with an M, that's all I can remember, but it would have been on that heritage permit letter. And they're maintaining the same design group. So in terms of
Marcus Hill, something like that.
And in terms of the architects, engineers, et cetera, what they indicated was there'd be no change to the project team because it was McCallum, their architects I previously, who were fully familiar with all the issues in terms of the heritage, structural stability, et cetera, related to the project. So we will be continuing to work with them as they advance the project. What they did indicate was the rising interest rates is impacting their ability. So they're having to adjust. So how can they ensure that the project is still affordable? So people will have, they only have, and that is forcing some of their rethink in terms of the project, but it's more, they're still committed to the project, but it's how can they still deliver a project that is in with people's affordability range as currently would be on a per square footage basis. And right now condominiums in downtown Hamilton are selling around $1,000 to $1,100 per square foot for the smaller condos. So they would be continuing trying to work within that price point, being adjusted for whatever interest rates are and carrying charges. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, long answer, but thank you.
So just quickly through the chair, I think Steve they did commit to continuing the heritage monitoring and the structural stability of the building. And I don't know if they've put a new report in, but we were expecting one.
Through the chair, yeah, we have not received a follow-up yet, but that is the expectation that before we issue an additional extension beyond the current interim permit, that would be coming in and we'd be reviewing that as well.
And you would be sharing that with Councillor Crutch?
Through the chair, yeah, we did have those conversations after, was it January meeting or December, in terms of ensuring that these monitoring reports are included publicly for the committee's information, obviously with any sensitive information redacted.
Thank you. That's terrific. Do you have something? Okay.
And just so it's on your 98 James South 2022 Inc. I think it's care of Marcus Gillum is the person of Toronto. I just happen to have the letter in front of me. But my question is about something else entirely. Now for something new. We could put a fence right around the building to protect the building from anybody entering the building. My concern at this point, or my question at this point, which I don't think has been asked yet, is are there any heritage concerns with them doing some grading immediately? So the reason I say this is that it's likely this property will remain in the state that it's in for some time. But it doesn't have to remain in the state that it's in. So what I'm wondering, are there any heritage concerns with them grading the property immediately and cleaning it up? Like, this doesn't have to be like this. It could be used, frankly, there's many things we could do with it. I mean, this may sound wild, but we could use it as public green space for a period of time while this is going on. There's lots of stuff to be done there. I have noticed when walking by the property 100 times that there are some heritage items that are in the refuse pile, and have now sat there for several years in that way. Grass is growing on it and so forth. So I understand it may now require some archaeology to retrieve these items. But long story short, what I'm saying is, like, is there a heritage reason why we couldn't ask the property developer if that could be graded, or have the city have a conversation about that? I think it's time.
Short answer is no, through Madam Chairman. I think that was part of the conversation with them about cleaning up the site, securing the site, looking at what are the opportunities, because it is a bit of a pile of rubble with some weeds growing in it and some sticks and branches, et cetera, et cetera. So that was part of the, it was a very introductory, exploratory meeting with them. But as we start the conversations with them, and I had a high degree of confidence that they were looking to really, address all these ongoing issues and concerns the neighborhood and the community had with the site, the way it currently looks. So we can have that follow-up conversation with them in terms of next steps and timing and sequencing, and hopefully get a better indication what their plans are when they plan to go to market, what they want. It's hard to market the project in its current condition as well. So all of those considerations and reporting back to the committee after we have those conversations. Thank you.
Thanks. And if there's an opportunity to have a discussion with them about, literally about grading it and turning it into a park in the meantime, like, I'm here for that conversation. I'll leave it there.
And through the chair, I have another one, and actually this one is going to be addressed to Councillor Kretsch. I understand that there was a closed meeting, Southwest Crossings. It was one of the ones that were under closed because it was an Ontario Land Tribunal. Something happened and you brought all of those into a closed meeting. This is 5456 Hess Street South. So what transpired? I still don't know the outcome of that land tribunal going back to how many years ago.
It was a closed meeting, so I can't say. Is the short answer.
Why? I know, but that was then. This is now.
Yeah, but eventually the settlement proceedings will be made public.
Sorry.
And so, no, it's okay. Eventually the settlement proceedings will be made public. It just takes a minute. And so once the settlement proceedings are made public, then when you can look them up, read them, it'll be fine. And it's just that can't say quite yet. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'll clarify, just so people understand where I'm coming from. I've been following this very closely since it went to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and we have been promised when we would get the decision on this property, and it's been ongoing, and the last time we were to get the decision was September 2022. So when I saw this on the agenda, that all of a sudden it was a closed meeting, and so I said, what happened to that decision? That's why I asked that question. Sorry for the outburst.
No, it's totally fine. Just so you know, and the staff have reported on this a lot in public, right? As you know, the Ontario Municipal Board, which has transformed several times, gone through many transformations and metamorphoses over the years, now is the Ontario Land Tribunal. Like, it's backed up unbelievably. And so these things are all taking, unfortunately, a more circuitous path than I think everybody would like. They're taking a lot longer. And so, but I feel like soonish.
Go ahead, Alison.
Through the chair, I will just note for those properties that you're asking about, Janice, they are on the register and they are on the proposed high priority work plan. Yeah.
Any other properties, Janice, before we move on? Our next speaker is Robin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just talking about the lighthouse and Beach Boulevard. The move has been delayed because the repairs of the bridge. So it doesn't look like it's going to happen in the near future. The other one is Akmar. It's going to be open for doors open on May 6th and 7th, but right now the city only wants it open for the 7th. One other one is the Copley Building, and they have protective mesh on the back wall on McNabb Street. And then they have some, it looks like burlap hoarding on the eaves now. And I have one question about 1 Main Street West, which is the former BMO Bank, Montreal. Why is it on the list?
Through the chair to Robin, I see that Will Rosart is the committee member that follows that. To best of my recollection, I can't recall the prompt for why it was added to this committee's yellow tracking list. We can try to find the history. Oh, unless Graham remembers.
I believe it was up for sale from the lawyers group, wasn't that?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, it was up for sale at one point, but I don't believe it is any longer. The lawyers are staying.
Can we take it off?
If the committee would like to. And saying it's confirmed that it's not changing document yet. Okay, Robin, if you'd like to put that motion forward, do we have a seconder?
I would like to take the a motion that the 1 Main Street West, which is the former Bank of Montreal building, be taken off the yellow list because it's no longer in danger.
Okay, and that was seconded by Janice.
Just through the chair, I just like to make a note, maybe if we could ask Will if when he's at the next meeting, we could defer it till then.
That's a reasonable request. Yeah.
Fine with me.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll make a note to review that property at the next meeting. Okay. Robin, did you have any other updates?
No, Madam Chair, that's enough.
And Tim, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, even though I do have a lot of properties, I don't have any update on my own. I'm actually giving an update on behalf of my fallen comrade, Chuck Dimitri, who's down with illness today. And it's to do with his property on 2251 Rymel Road East. I think of it as the Vickers Vice building, but it's the former Elfrida Church. There's a big article in the paper about it's again up for sale and ownership group changing on that one, and there was a collapse of business in it. I'm just wondering for a clarity on what the status of that building is now, with all of our new designated. I think it was a registry, but not a designated one. Is it in the close to designation? Because it is a great risk out there for oopsie parking lot creation over top of it at any moment. I could imagine in that area.
Through the chair to Tim, yes, so that property is currently listed on the register, and it is also a part of the high priority candidates for designation list, in Appendix B of the staff report from earlier today.
All right, that's it for me.
Okay. Are there any other updates for anyone? Seeing none, may I have a motion to receive these updates?
I see Graham and I see Karen.
Okay, and is there anyone opposed to receiving? Seeing none, that item is carried. We now move on to item 13.3, which is about the application process. Lorraine, would you like to give us an overview?
Thank you, through the chair. Clerk's office has launched a recruitment for a series of agencies, local boards, and subcommittees starting today. The deadline will be April 6th. The Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee is one of the subcommittees on that list, so I just wanted to point that out to everyone at the meeting. You have been sent an email with all the information, including the link. And if you have any questions regarding the recruitment, you can email me directly.
Thank you, Lorraine. And maybe just to clarify, the committee will still be active.
Absolutely. The committee will be members until the new members are appointed.
Through the chair, and if I could just obviously thank everyone who currently volunteers their time. Hopefully you'll consider reapplying and continuing on with us. If you could also pass along to the various working groups for some of the volunteer members that currently maybe don't sit on this main committee, maybe they're interested in working their way up and actually formally applying. So if you could share that information with those members as well, that would be great.
That's good. Is there, oh, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, just through the chair to Councillor Kretsch, do you know who the makeup of your selection committee is going to be and what councillors are going to be looking at, and will you be on that committee?
From memory, I haven't retained that information, but yes, I'm on the selection committee for agencies, boards, and committees, so I'm on that, but don't recall who the others are. If you're curious to know, you can look at the last council meeting where it was approved, and it'll be there in the report that's listed there, either that one or the one before. So either February 22nd or February 8th will give you the answer. And sorry, I don't have it in front of me now.
Okay, and I don't know that you can speak for the entirety of the committee, but will there be a larger look at diversity in the makeup of the committees? Because this one's been pretty homogenous, to say the least. So is that
I think
something?
legislative coordinator Kolar can speak to that better than me because the clerks are the ones who are managing that process.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilor Courage. And through the chair, yes. Pardon me. The selection committee will be going through some training and be given other information to help guide them through the process. But again, we are, part of it is based on who applies. So the city has been working very hard to reach out to as many people as possible about the recruitment information. Additional information and training is going to the counselors who will be participating in the recruitment process. We have sent out information regarding the recruitment to many different community groups who might not have in the past received that information. We rely on current committee members to share those emails, like the email I sent out today. Send it to it's public information. Send it to whoever you like to get that information out. So we will do the best with what we have, but we are making great strides in improving the recruitment process.
Councilor Kretsch and then Lynn.
I just want to add one thing, sorry. I really wasn't that clear. There are really a lot of recruitment processes for these committees, actually, so I want to be really clear about that. So, for instance, if there's an advisory committee that reports to the Emergency and Community Services Committee, there's a group of people who are the interview subcommittee for the Emergency and Community Services Committee who will do interviews for that, right? So there ends up being these little pods of councillors who are doing that kind of thing. There is, of course, a group that does it for agencies, boards, and committees in general. And then this time around, for the very first time ever, there'll be a composite committee of folks selected by HARC and others to do the Hamilton Police Services Board recruitment. And so there'll be a composite group of 12 people, 6 residents, 6 city councillors who will be picking the one citizen appointment to the Hamilton Police Services Board. That process alone is extremely rigorous. It's gone through a ton of vetting. There's been, a real thoughtful approach to how equity is understood through that process. And so that's one example I can tell you right away that will certainly be, a rigorous example you can turn to. There'll be more of those. So that helps.
And Tim, through the chair, selection committee currently is made up of the following councillors. Councillor Cassar, Clark, Francis, Jackson, Kretsch, Nan, Taddison, Alex Wilson, and Maureen Wilson. And we aren't currently recruiting for the advisory committees, so those interview subcommittees aren't going to be called into meetings just yet, but that will be coming. I don't have a confirmed date for the advisory committees. It's just the agencies, local boards, and subcommittees that we're recruiting for now.
Lynn?
Through the chair, I was just wondering if the number people on the board remains the same?
Yes, it is the subcommittee itself that determines how many members they wish to have in their terms of reference. The terms of reference does not change unless the subcommittee wishes to change its own terms of reference. So long story long, the membership will remain the same.
Okay. Our next item is, I think we should just discuss a couple of upcoming dates. Robin had mentioned Doors Open. So that's coming up on May 6th and 7th. We've just found that out. So there'll be more information coming out through ACO as they get themselves organized. And then tomorrow is Heritage Day that's being organized at Dundurn Castle. Robin, I don't know if you have any additional information you want to share on that with the committee?
Through you, Chair, no, it's, the agenda is fixed now, and, in cooperation with the city of Hamilton, the Hamilton Wentworth Heritage Association is hosting, Heritage Day, and, the idea was that, the city, gave us, the, carriage house to, do our thing again. It's a kind of a shrunk Heritage Day with presentations and only two tables, one for the association and one for this committee, so you can put things on your table to greet people and educate and information. And that was negotiated so that you could have that. And yeah. And the city has presentations. Dundurn will be open for free tours, and there will be food.
So the important part is the time. So that's starting at 12 o'clock till 1:30.
Yeah, oh yeah, noon.
Is there any other new business? Oh, go ahead, Graham.
Seeing as it looks like we're going to be dragging on in their roles for a while, we have the Ontario Heritage Conference coming up. So we should be finding out if we're going to be sending members and how we select them.
I believe I saw the 31st.